This week, Kumar and Emmet discuss My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris, a horror film-influenced graphic novel that got noticed by mainstream press outlets before the comics world noticed it. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for keeping this show going. Join them at patreon.com/deconcomics. If Patreon isn't in your budget, you can also send a one-time donation of any amount via PayPal to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
All right, we good to go?
Yes.
Okay, this is Kumar.
This is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar and Emmet. Melbourne.
Nailed it.
Somebody at me because I
Nailed
can't
it.
say Deconstructing Comics. Anyway, we are going to talk about My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris from 2017. As always, Deconstructing Comics is a couple of years behind the ball on reviewing a super hot book. And we just interestingly watched about 5 YouTube videos to try to figure out how to pronounce her name.
Well, it's one of those deceptive names which we could very easily get wrong. And just on your point about us being a couple of years behind the times, My Favorite Thing of Monsters is a book that was embraced by the mainstream press.
Yeah.
And by your NPR podcasts, all these likes. And I feel like it's slowly descended into the consciousness of like the comic sphere that we would be interacting with.
Okay.
So I think we're on schedule with this one, actually.
Okay. Well, I think there is a sequel coming. It's
Yes.
been announced. So maybe, we're in the middle ground between books. That's fine.
Yeah.
But interesting thing about trying to find her name is, before coming into this, I had never heard of this
This is my point.
person before, knew nothing about her, and as far as I can tell, she emerged as a fully formed cartoonist. So I've only seen headlines, about the book, and I've seen 1 or 2 pictures, and I'm like, she's a woman who's maybe in her early 50s or late 40s or something.
It's early 50s, and I believe this is, after a period of, I don't want to go too much into her biography, but after a period of illness, I understand that this was her debut work.
Right.
And it feels like a hotboxed piece of inspiration,
Yeah.
And again, like, we're going to talk about the style of the comic, we're going to talk about the way she presents these images, but the notebook approach, like, which mimics a child trying to draw her imagination in her own notebook in this long form format as a graphic novel, is genius. Like, I really appreciate what she's done here.
I'd say I go even further than that, because it's not, she doesn't, this is what amazes me. So here's a person who's never put out a comic before, as far as I know.
Yeah.
There's a range of art styles in it. So it's not just the childlike art style, because that was a problem I had with Persepolis Part 2. Because in Part 1, it's like it's drawn as if it's drawn by a child. And in Part 2, she's an adult, but she's still drawing like a child. And for me, there was a bit of a disconnect there. Here, it's all over the place. Sometimes it's very childlike drawings, and sometimes it's totally photorealistic. A lot of times it reminded me of Al Jaffe, the Mad artist, and Mad is mentioned, and we'll get to all that kind of stuff. But it's really something like, who else does that? Like maybe Chris Ware, or can pull off a whole bunch of different styles. And it's not a short comic. It's 400 plus pages. And I've been reading, I started reading Anna Karenina this month.
Okay, appropriate,
And then I was reading this at the same time over the last 2 weeks, and this is just as dense and epic and packed, and there's so many plot threads going on, maybe even a little bit too much, which we'll get to later, but I was amazed by how much is in it and how long it is to draw 450 pages of comics for your first comic is what they always tell you not to do. They always tell you try to start small with an 8-pager or something, and it's just where did she come from? Just like
well, this is the thing. One of the reasons why they tell you not to do that is because you're coming into a crowded marketplace already, and you're trying to hit that level that a lot of established artists are already at.
Yes.
So you have all this competition, and you're a debut artist. She has produced a work of this length, but it's in this completely unique style.
Yeah.
So that's what sets her apart. And that is why I think her work was grasped by the mainstream press and taken up as, this is new, this is interesting, we'll give this a punt. Whereas if she had produced something with a very serialized style, like in a normal comic book style, which has a sort of homogeneity to it, it would have been lost in the din. Like, it would have been one book among many others, and what would have set her apart?
Yes.
She did something different. So maybe that's a codicil to all the people's advice. You can do your epic at the gate, but just make sure it's completely different from anything else in the marketplace, and then you'll get noticed.
Yes. I will say, so coming into it, again, not only did I not know anything about her, I didn't know anything about the book. And just from the kind of headlines I saw, somehow I assumed it was autobiographical. It is not. It's about a fictional character. It maybe has elements. Maybe she grew up in Chicago around the same time. Maybe she had the same feelings as these characters. But it is fiction, and it's kind of the same. So it's set in '68. In fact, it starts on Valentine's Day '68. We can work out exact dates based on a few things. Really reminded me of Stuck Rubber Baby by Howard Cruz, which also seemed like it was going to be autobiographical on the surface, and then turned out not to be. It was fictional, but it's also set during the Civil Rights Movement, and it also has an idiosyncratic 3D kind of art style, very solid looking art, sometimes photorealistic, like I said. There's even certain themes, if that's the right word, like homosexuality and things. So that's kind of what it immediately reminded me of, but again, it's completely different. So maybe we should talk about what it's about a little bit.
Okay.
So it starts in '68, as I said. There's this girl named Karen Reyes. She lives with her brother Dees, who is the kind of a Latino womanizer type.
He's a man about town.
He's got some crazy tattoos. One of Zapata, one of who's Frida Kahlo's husband, Diego. Anyway, and his mother in the middle. And she lives with her mother.
Even in that, the sort of Hispanic tattoos, the history of the Hispanic people in these tattoos. So he's immediately identified from his culture, but also you've got this notion of art from Hispanic culture, which maybe has been excluded by all these media that Karen is trying to embrace. Like, she's addicted to horror movies,
right, and horror comics,
which are all about othering.
Yes,
and what is othered is typically what is non-white and what is non-American.
Right,
and then she comes from this culture which is non-white, and America would reject, because, and particularly in that time in Chicago, and this sort of setting that they're in, where they're in this low-class tenement building, and even that, immediately we're aware that this girl and her interest is because she automatically feels, even at that young age, excluded by the society she's from.
Right,
which is a great starting point.
Yes, so she's always drawn herself. She's ostensibly telling her own story and drawing it in this notebook, and she's drawing herself with fangs, these cute kind of fangs on her lower jaw, because she imagines herself as part monster. She wants to become a full monster. She wants to get the bite. She wants to be bitten by a monster to become a full monster.
And she's a wolf girl.
She's a wolf girl, right.
And again, you got the hairiness of a girl shouldn't be hairy either. That's the other thing too. So like, a wolf girl is the most unfeminine thing for her to be.
Right. Well, not only that, I mean, she's only 10, but she already knows she's a homosexual.
Yeah.
So she's very precocious, so you can add the precociousness and the homosexuality on top of it.
Yeah.
So she's very much an outsider. Her mother is she's like half Appalachian Indian and Hispanic and Irish and all sorts of stuff mixed up, I think. I don't remember all the whole mix that was in there. We don't know anything about the dad. He's out of the picture. Mm-hmm. Those are the exact words they use. And so as we mentioned, so it's drawn as if it's on blue-lined, spiral-bound notebook pages, which have, I guess, I don't know how she produced these, or they scanned into a computer and she printed them. I don't know how she created this effect, but she's drawn on top of, and if you own the physical book, it's really, when you open the pages, you think you're holding a spiral-bound blue-lined notebook.
It's like a talented school child.
In fact, I even felt, because it's got the hole punches as well.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I opened it, I I put my fingers in the binding because I was like, are those spirals really there?
And that lends itself as well to the experimentalism of it.
I have seen some stuff that was really avant-garde that was drawn on top of like catalogs and stuff, but I've never seen...
Like, look, yeah,
This is a kid...
We're actually looking at the physical book right now, and I can't tell you what section of the book I'm looking at right now, but it's just a 2-page spread, all blue. It's clearly a art piece that she's mimicking, and it's a woman wearing a bonnet hat and an old-style dress, and it looks aquatic almost.
Yeah, they're supposed to be in the aquarium, actually.
Yeah. And it just, again, like, it's stunning. This is one of the flashback sequences from Germany. Yeah. Which we'll get into in a moment. But yeah, it looks like a young girl mashing blue pyro pen all over her notebook to create the aquatic feel, and then she's drawn heavily over it with these detailed illustrations.
Yeah.
It's a stunning piece. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so she's an outsider. Then we get a million plot elements that come in. So the first one is there's an upstairs lady. So they live in the basement apartment, I think. It's not just a tenement. They're in the basement. They're in the worst spot. Upstairs there's a woman named Anka, who's a kind of an oddball eccentric. But on Valentine's Day, when Karen comes home from school, she discovers that Anka is dead. Now, Anka has been shot in the chest, but then was found in her own bed, like she moved from the living room. So there's a mystery. So it's probably, they're saying it's suicide. It seems very obvious that it's not. There's a whole bunch of confusing stuff about the gun. At one point they said they couldn't find it, then they said they did have it, but the husband didn't recognize her. Anyway, there's all sorts of little details about that. Then we get a bit of a mystery about who killed Anka. I don't know if it's a bit of a mystery. It's one of the concerns of the book, among many other things.
So then the story becomes Karen learning about Anka's life.
Right, but we also learn a lot about Karen.
Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting thing. So Karen, she loves art because her brother loves art, and her brother has taught her about art. And there are all these visits to the art gallery, and she has a kind of almost synesthesia about art. Like when she smells certain things or sees colors or has a certain vibe, she associates certain paintings or other colors or things almost automatically. And her brother has taught her to draw at a very early age. So we get a lot of that, and she seems to, like I said, she's precocious. She seems to know about a lot of stuff. Like she mentions Chester the Molester, which was a comic strip from Hustler. I'm not sure where she's picking up all this stuff. I think maybe from her brother. Right, so we get all of that, but it isn't actually until now. It was funny to me because they're kind of wondering, okay, who killed Anka? But it isn't until I wrote it down. Let me think. About page 140. Suddenly it turns into a Holocaust memoir because we start to get this flashback 140 pages into a 400-page book.
So Karen's talking to the husband,
yes, and
who's relating to her Anka's life.
No, well, he has a recording. He's messed up.
Yeah.
But someone came in and interviewed Anka and recorded all of her memories on cassette. And they listened to the cassette, so they've got it coming back in Anka's voice. And that's like 100 pages of that. so it really shifts gears.
Yep.
And there's a lot of stuff in there that's a whole story in itself, because so she maybe we should do it chronologically. So then Anka, we get the story of how when she was a little girl in Berlin just before the Nazis were about to take power, and her mother ended up going to work in a brothel. She ended up getting sold to a guy.
Yep.
And then she somehow she tried to escape. And her friend she had a friend in the brothel that got sent to some other place, and she said, "Can I go there?" She goes to that place. It turns out to be an abbey where the satanic ritual happens, and she escapes from the ritual. She goes back to the guy she was sold to, she's been sold to I think she went to him once or something. He raises her until she becomes too old for him to be sexually interested in her. 13, I worked out from the dates. And she leaves, and then she gets picked up by the Nazis and sent to a concentration camp. And then she runs back. Oh no, I've got it all wrong already. Then she comes back to him. Then he kicks her out when she's 13. She lives with him for a while.
Sure.
This guy named Schutz. And she manages to rescue like 5 people from the camp, or 7, something like that.
Because she's using his connections.
Right.
Yeah.
And she promises some of these girls can be prostitutes.
Yeah.
And I'll need a cook and a driver. And she tries to rescue one more boy for errands, and he refuses. Schutz refuses.
Yeah.
All right, then maybe we come back to the present. There are a whole bunch of possible suspects, including Dees himself, who claimed he was at work but wasn't at work, and had previously had a sexual history with Anka, though she was like 20 or 30 years older. There's a guy in the building. There's a kind of a gangster who owns the building, Laughing Jack Gronin. There's, for some reason, Karen's mother was not in the building, was not at work, though she said she was. And there's a guy called Mr. Chug, who's a ventriloquist, who disappears.
So, like, Ferris is playing with the sort of locked room mystery here.
Yeah, it's a very locked room mystery, because I think the doors were locked from the inside, but the body's been moved.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's almost none of the book. That's a very few pages of the book.
That's going to keep us. That's going to bring us back to Volume 2, as well as the remainder of Anka's life. There's going to be more of this explored in Volume 2.
Yes. Well, that was kind of the shocker for me, because I really thought it was a done in one volume, even though it says Volume 1 at the start. Somehow I missed that. I glossed over that, and then started reading. And at the very end of the book, Dee says, "You know who killed Anka," and I'm like, "Oh, we do."
Because a lot of what Karen is saying to us as well, we have to remind, she is your traditional unreliable narrator as well, because she is substituting monsters, or she's substituting her imagination for things she has witnessed.
Well, what about the satanic ritual that Anka went through? I'm like, did Anka think this incorrectly? Did it really happen?
Yeah.
Or did Anka was Anka a kind of analog to Karen who imagined it herself? Or was it something much worse that Karen has blocked out and redrawn, or just decided to insert this satanic ritual?
Sure. Yeah, because everything we're reading is being visualized on notepaper by this girl.
Right.
So, and just the hyper detail of it when she's describing Berlin, and she's describing the brothel, or she's describing art galleries that Schutz brings her to, and like, how is this girl conjuring up all of this? Well, she has this history, she has an art history love, and she has a love of old film, and she's bringing all these things into her little notebook drawings. And again, it's her genius as an artist, this child, that is part of the story. This child is constructing this narrative herself.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a murder mystery, it's this girl creating a world, and we're being invited to read it. And it's just, again, that's what makes this such a special experience. That you feel as if there's something intimate and I've read this twice, And I've lent this to a couple of people saying, look, okay, this is my sort of almost starter pack
Yeah.
for people now. It's my new favorite book to lend people
Right.
who have no experience with comics. Because, okay, this is very different, but this is very novelistic.
Yeah.
Like, it feels a lot like the Great American Immigration novel. So your, I want to throw out your Saul Bellows, your Don DeLillos, these very sort of interwoven, tightly plotted, but like vastly structured stories, these novels. And this has that same feel because you dive into it and you experience these jumps in time, these jumps in personality, and all these different subplots, and it makes sense somehow. It all is quite interwoven. So that's where the part that's interesting to me is I need to remind myself every now and then when I'm reading it, well, this is meant to be a young girl who's actually telling me this story.
Right.
And it's this woman who's the author, but like that little communication is really interesting to me as an experience while I'm reading this.
Yes.
It's just something to bear in mind.
Yes.
And then this older woman's voice enters the story when Anka is retelling her life. And then this girl is an amanuensis for that too. Like she's transcribing what she's hearing in this audio tape. And that's also the story.
Yeah.
Like all these different voices are speaking to me, and I just feel it's just almost it's quite profound. It's the sense of these women who have been abused or who have been exploited or who are victims of violence, and they're telling their story. And it's the story that has not been told because, like with horror movies, there are certain there's the monsters and then there's the heroes, and the women are victims.
Right.
And this girl has chosen to side with the monsters. Like she's chosen that's who she wants to be a part of. Sorry. I guess that's why I wanted us to talk about this, because I feel it's not only is it notable for what makes it different, but it's notable in the sort of intimate experience I had while reading it.
Yeah.
And I can't think of many other works currently that are sort of best-selling comics that do that same thing, that have this density of emotion in them.
I agree, but I think the shifting art styles is part of it. I think that's part of the waves of the ebbs and flows, or the kind of rhythm of the flow of it. The kind of, when you think of other works that are equally long, sometimes they're drawn in a kind of static way, by which I mean there's not a whole lot of shifting of art styles.
Yeah.
Asterios Polyp was one that was all over the map in terms of art styles. I don't say that in a native way. And I think this too.
I think Brian Talbot does this kind of stuff too. Like
yes.
He will do the experimental and then the sort of mock pulp style every now and then.
There's a really interesting bit in Anka's story when she first gets sold to... she does get sold to a brothel. She gets sold to what's called the pharmacy or something like that.
Yeah.
Where the quote-unquote doctor gives out quote-unquote medicine, and the medicine is the girls. And that first day there, one of the other girls climbs into bed with Anka and starts fooling around with her. With Anka, and starts fooling around with her. And Anka's a bit freaked out, but that is drawn in the most sketchy 5-year-old style compared to the way other stuff. It's like the most childish drawings for the most maturing moment.
Karen's had her lesbian experience. Like, she has a girl that she wanted to have a relationship with, but this is something outside of her experience, and that sort of lends itself. You understand that when you're reading that sequence. Yeah. So she maybe relates to this as in terms of a girl being attracted, or the idea of being attracted to girls, but then what the next step, she doesn't know what the next step is, you know, because she's a child. Right. And again, it's perfectly introduced. Yeah. In that, as you say, the use of style gives us a sense of what's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we've got, so in the present, so we've got all of her stuff at Karen's. There's a bit of the bullying stuff. There's a lot of the art gallery stuff. She has two friends. One is, what's her name, Sally or something like that? Sandy. She's a real funny misfit kind of character.
Mm-hmm.
And they just automatically kind of click. Even Karen thinks she's kind of an oddball.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a guy named Franklin who is a black, also gay, more obviously so, at least to other people. And his face is scarred up. He looks a bit like a Frankenstein, which again attracts her.
So she draws him like James Whale's Frankenstein,
Yeah.
who, again, queer icon. But,
Yeah, right.
like, it plays really well.
Yeah.
So that's her sort of horror movie symbolism at work again. Like, that's how she understands his circumstance.
Right.
Through the model of Frankenstein.
Right.
Or Frankenstein's monster. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then he rescues her. The first time they really interact is when he rescues her from a potential gang rape.
Yeah.
By these guys under a bridge. I'm just trying to remember all the stuff, because there's so much that happens. I'm just kind of flipping through my notes going, oh yeah, then she goes to the graveyard and she meets the ghost of the first ever female private investigator, and all sorts of stuff happens. We go through the Martin Luther King assassination, also from May 1968. That plays a major part, or at least a major atmospheric part of the back end of the book. Now, the thing about the density is, the thing I didn't like was, I feel like there was a little bit too much going on, because we've got all the stuff we've talked about, but Mum also gets cancer, Dees gets drafted, we've got the Martin Luther King assassination, then we find out that there was also another major spoiler, there was another brother named Victor who died. We don't know when. We learn that Dees shot someone at some stage and Anka helped him. We don't know that story in this volume.
Yeah.
We don't know much about Victor. I guess you want to be like Chekhov and put all the stuff in the first act that's going to play out later. Maybe we do need to know all this stuff. The dad is still alive somewhere, because Dees is worried that when the mother dies, he's going to want insurance money out of him. So it felt really busy to me.
There's a lot going on, but then again, like I'll remind you that this is from the point of view of a child.
That's true.
So there's a lot of stuff outside of her control, and that's what the experience of childhood is like.
Yeah.
You're a bystander in your own life until you gain some measure of autonomy, and a lot of this is sort of outside of her ability to control. So therefore, it is strange. And then if it's not immediately related to her, then she doesn't think about it. So
You're right.
Like it's all there. It's all out there.
Yeah.
And for an adult who'd be like, it's almost like when you look at a horror movie and the characters do things that make no sense. Why are you going down the basement? Be sensible. But they're characters in a horror movie. They have to go down to the basement.
There's also, you just remind me, there's also a thing about the basement. There's a secret room in the basement, which they don't get into in this volume. She doesn't get in there. She's like, how do I get in there? And a few times she tries to get back into this room.
So the rules, like the logical rules of life that we sort of live by as adults, don't apply to children. And the children aren't particularly interested in the adult world because they have this sense of privation over their world that they have some measure of control over. And it's almost like it's a separate experience.
You're right, but in constructing a work of fiction, would you include all its elements?
That's what I'm saying. I'm wondering if the work of fiction is trying to evoke that sense of private, intimate space. And then you've got the adult world outside of that. And then as the child is learning more about what's really going on and she's becoming more of an adult, as she's getting older, and we're experiencing that passage of time and that maturity with her, then more and more of that stuff will be brought in.
Yeah, I haven't even mentioned that Laughing Jack Groening, the landlord, ends up going to jail. He takes a fall for something. We don't know what it was.
Yeah.
But he takes the fall. He goes to jail, but he uses Karen as a spy
Yeah, to keep an eye
on his wife, to make sure his
yeah.
wife isn't sleeping around, but she is sleeping with Dees.
Yeah.
And there's another guy that he's employed who's also a spy, that's been living there for years across the road, keeping an eye on the building. That guy's name is Sally.
Yeah.
Short for Salvador or something. I kind of agree, but I do think, I mean, when you piled on the cancer and the getting drafted, it was kind of like, it's a very long book. Yeah. And it's hard to remember. I read it twice, and a lot of my notes, I didn't take any notes the first time. The second time I was like, okay, like I remember reading it, and I'd get to the end. I read it about 100 pages a day, and I would get to page 300, and I was like, she talks about something. I was like, what was that thing again? And when I went through my notes, I was like, okay, make a note. That's when that thing appeared, or that's why that character is colored blue all the time. Like I couldn't remember why she was blue, and I remember she mentioned it for some reason. She mentioned she goes to this place called the Green Island, like this fantasy world. I was like, what was that again? And then, oh yeah, the second time I was like, oh yeah, that was a little speck in her mother's eye that she imagined she would go into.
Coming up, what might Ferris's influences be? Details in the art in this book, the horror references, and more. First, you can support all our podcasts at patreon.com/deconcomics, where you can access extra content related to Deconstructing Comics and To the Bat Poles. We're planning more Patreon-only audio content in the future, so if you're not a supporter, sign up now at patreon.com/deconcomics.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul.
To the Bat Poles! The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Poles podcast. A terrific podcast, Rave's Got a Rugrat, that brings review, film analysis, and sociological impact to episode-by-episode musings without ever losing the feeling of two brothers with towels tied around their necks, running through the backyard. Unmissable.
Exquisite.
You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com.
Wild!
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Poles.
There's so much density of theme already. And I mean, we haven't talked about even that. I mean, it's also about, like, within the first 5 pages, somebody calls this homeless guy a dirty Indian. Like, the racism theme is there from page 5 or 10.
Yeah.
And then you get the monsters are there right at the beginning. Very interesting. There's a very interesting misdirect at the beginning where before you see Karen for the first time, you hear the narration and she says, like, I'm moaning in my room like my mother does. Or I'm moaning in my room like my brother does, and my mom would be angry if she knew what I was doing in here. And it's a real misdirect where you think she's masturbating, but actually she's turning into a werewolf that's about to go out and kill. So there's all sorts of stuff.
It's not really a misdirect because also her identity and her sense of self, which is othered, is related to that transformation into the werewolf. So it is sexual in a sense, in that, like, she is feeling this is what sets her apart and this is her private thing, which is to become a werewolf.
Yes.
A wolf girl.
But if you haven't flipped through the book and know that she's drawn as a wolf girl, reading that first page, it's like the Aline Kaminsky Crumb fruit masturbation scene from her very first comic.
And, like, do you draw a line of descent from this back to that era, particularly underground comics era? Because we talk about Crumb a lot when we talk about underground comics, but there are a lot of women who took the opportunity to use this new approach to comic making to tell their own stories. And I think the myth makers of the underground tended to ignore a lot of, like you mentioned, like Trina Robbins is coming to Melbourne shortly for the conference at Acme, superhero conference at Acme, and because she did a lot of Wonder Woman work, but her start was as an underground artist, and she is somebody who revisionists have brought back as, here is the lady who actually
an important cartoonist,
hugely important cartoonist. And while you were all rhapsodizing about Crumb for all these years, there was all these other cartoonists at the same time who not only were not Crumb, but they were not men, and they have not been celebrated as much as maybe their work warranted. And this feels like an offshoot of that underground style. Like, I can tell the stories that reflect my experience because I'm doing an underground comic and I don't have to put up with the gatekeepers. I'm just going to do my weird little comic and put it out in a zine. And then this is just produced by a major publisher and it's this giant piece, but it still feels almost zine-like in its approach.
I think that's interesting because Aline felt ostracized from that group because they felt the stuff that she was drawing was too rough.
Yeah.
Like the content, like the scene of her masturbating with vegetables, that was kind of like, you shouldn't be putting this in comics kind of stuff. I don't know if I see a line of dissent. Like for me, like definitely the Howard Cruz thing was the closest.
Sure.
I think we've reached a stage where, like I said, Emil Ferris seemed to come out of nowhere, and I feel like, I don't know what she was influenced by, and I feel like...
She was an illustrator before this, though. I think she was...
She must have been.
She was working...
Surely.
She was working professionally, but she just wasn't doing comics.
Right, surely. But I feel like we're getting to the stage, like, Ruta Modan is another one that just came out of nowhere, and it's like, here I am, and I'm an awesome cartoonist, and here's my 300-page book, and...
Yeah.
We don't need the kind of inheritance or the hereditary line. I mean, if you're to shelve it on a bookshelf, yes, but I wouldn't necessarily say this exists because of that. If anything, I think Mouse is still a huge influence on both genders, or all genders, especially when you come to... You have to think about it when you get to a Holocaust memoir kind of thing.
But also novelistically, I think this feels more like a book to me.
Yes.
At times.
Yes.
And again, like, when we're going to the Berlin sequence, and, maybe I need to read more widely, but, like, I did feel there were hints of Nabokov in there. When we're talking about the Chicago years and this sort of immigrant experience, I was thinking about Saul Bellow. I was thinking about a lot of his writing, and Don DeLillo's Underworld, because you've got all these sort of timelines intersecting, and this hyper-detailed, personalized narration, which is part of the evolution of the novel, that it became, like, is this biography, or is this fiction, is this memoir, is this confessional, and it sort of mimics that. Like, my favorite thing is Monsters mimics that as well, because this is a child talking to us and then relaying to us the experience of a dead woman. All of that is very literary, and that's what this seems to encapsulate too, on top of Mouse, which I see why you'd compare it, but I think it's very different.
It's superficial.
Mouse.
I mean, it's a superficial comparison. I mean,
right.
It's just because there were things in here that I never... I mean... In all of the Holocaust stories I've seen, I never knew about the fake shops at the camps.
Right, okay.
The fake storefronts.
Yeah.
So they enter the camp and there's kind of this lull, like, oh, there are shops here. We're just here to work. If we work hard, we'll be fine. And they can fill these shops with stuff. And then she realizes that the shop staff is just a mannequin with its back turned. Like, she realizes that. And she knew that they would be killed. Like, soon. And then you realize the stuff in the shops is just stuff they've taken from the Jews and the homosexuals and the prostitutes that they've heard in there. And that's another thing is she mentions how the prostitutes were also sent to the camps, and people don't talk about that because people are ashamed of their sexual side of culture.
Yeah.
So Mouse, I mean... Well, what else is there actually in comics for that kind of... But, I mean, you often hear interviews with people when they talk about the revelation of what you can do in comics. It's often Mouse is for a lot of this generation of cartoonists, that's kind of the thing that got...
I think we're getting, like, recently in the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, there are more of these almost doorstopper books coming out. And... like, all of them ambitious, clear-minded, and as you said, like maybe there's not a direct line of descent between any particular movement and them. Like, some of them are very personal. I'm thinking of, like, The Now of Brown is another one, which is a very distinct book, very again, very intimate comic book reading experience. And even still, despite the fact that all these new players are coming to the table with equally ambitious works, we keep going back to Spiegelman, we keep going back to Maus, because that's almost like a journalistic shorthand for a lot of us. Go, oh, I get what you mean. It's in that ballpark.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't necessarily talk about Alice in Sunderland or Now Brown, and that's why I tend to try and mention them, because I'm going, no, but these recent, they're also really, really good, and we should be talking about them too. So that's, I think my favorite thing in Monsters is going to be one of those books as well. Like if that gets mentioned in relation to as a comparison, you will have a sense of, oh, I get what you mean. And because this has had a lot of mainstream media attention, it's probably going to be used as a reference point critically.
Right.
The other one I was thinking of was Through the Woods.
Yeah, Emily Carroll.
Yeah, Emily Carroll. I mean, if somebody mentions Emily Carroll, you go, oh, I know what you mean. Very recent book.
Yeah.
But it's already hit that sort of echelon. It's something we recognize as, oh, this was artistically quite interesting. So I do hope that when we talk about comics, we do have a sense of the variety that we currently have out there. So we're not, again, have this mouse bottleneck where everything's just mouse.
No, you're right.
Not to disregard or disrespect Spiegelman. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I like variety.
Well, I think mouse means
serious,
ambitious, like long.
Yeah.
Pulitzer Prize winning.
Sure.
That's the target.
Yeah. It's absurd when you talk about, say, you go to a comic book website and you'll read an article all about, and then comics got serious because of Mouse, Watchmen, and Dark Knight Returns. You go, okay, like 3 books that are extremely different. It's become like this sort of milestone in the development of comics as opposed to a work in and of itself, which could give rise or inspire other distinct work. Now it's sort of this is when comics became graphic novels because Mouse won the Pulitzer,
Yeah.
Which, not to go completely off topic, but that's where I get annoyed because I'm going, no, let's keep building on that artistic achievement. Let's keep trying to celebrate what's out there right now or recently.
Yeah.
But this is definitely up there, I think. Even that cover, look at that cover. Like the detail of readers, listeners. This is an audio medium, so that doesn't help anybody. But just looking at the cover of this, you got the detail of the face.
Right. So she actually creates that 3 dimensions with the.
Do you see the skull and the eye?
Yeah. So the eyes are. So sometimes when she decides she's going to do a photorealistic or hyper-realistic.
Yeah.
The eyes are often really the most striking. Thing. Because they look like real eyes, and she's got the glints in them, and she's got sometimes there's a little hidden skull in there or something. I also noticed there's an interesting thing where at one point Dees is painting these darumas, and a daruma is a kind of Japanese doll, it's just a head, but you paint one eye. You make a wish and you paint one eye, and after the wish comes true, you paint the other eye. And a lot of times in the book, characters are placed on the page such that their face falls where the punch holes of the ring binder are, so one eye is missing. And I don't know what to make of. It's almost like the smiley faces on the fire hydrants in Watchmen. I don't know if you're supposed to make something of it, but there's a motif that keeps coming back in an almost physical way. It's almost like it's physically on the ring binder that you have the illusion of holding in your hands. But the glints are really amazing, and that's part of the thing that pops off the page. And also she has this way of, she cross-hatches I don't know how long it would take to draw something like this, but the cover is not the showcase piece of the book. There's millions of pieces in there that are as detailed. And it's sometimes it's the cross-hatching that is in one panel she uses pointillism because she's looking at a pointillist painting. And then she does it that way. But then that comes back thematically later where she was saying, Mom says things are black and white. Dee says things are gray. They're both wrong. Everything is dots. Tiny dots. So every little, I guess, action or thought is right or wrong. And those things create a gray picture of the world. God, I loved all that stuff. I thought it was so tight. Is
this like, okay, so I've mentioned that this is the book I've lent to people.
Yeah.
Is this something you'd recommend to other people? Is this something that you would hand out as a... Let me convert you to a comic book reader here. Read My Favorite Thing is Monsters.
My feeling is everybody's different.
Sure.
And you have to know what to give them.
Sure.
I think you have to tailor it. This book, I definitely... There's a lot of people I would hand it to, for sure. I would warn them about it being part one.
Yeah.
I mean, did you... When you got to the end and when Dee said you know who killed Anka, do you know who killed Anka?
No.
Okay. So we're not supposed to know.
I mean, I'm not a great detective, so I wouldn't claim to have followed
Well,
the
the first time through I read it and I got to that line, it's almost at the end of the book and I was like, wait a second.
I didn't think that was the question you were about to ask me. I thought you were just about to ask me, did you feel gypped that, like, oh, there's going to be a part two? And
That's almost the question.
I was preparing to answer you no, because
okay.
this is such a satisfying experience in and of itself. The thought that I've got more coming, like I'm just greedy for what's next.
I agree, but I think it ends with a cliffhanger. It's not just that one. It's she goes into the green world again, her fantasy place. She's there alone. She's always there alone, but suddenly someone appears and she turns around and she says, "Oh, Dee." And she's like, "No one's ever come here before." And she turns around to Dee. She says, "No, it's me, Victor." So it's kind of a cliffhanger ending. Which is the one thing that might make me hesitate to
give it to somebody.
Someone.
Yeah.
Do we know how many volumes are planned?
I don't. I assume it's only the two, but I don't know that for a fact. Because it's so much work. I mean,
it is.
I do wonder what the objective is, but it feels like a two-part story.
Well, it's interesting too because how is it gonna? So this is kind of bookended. Well, not bookended, but it's certainly a large part of the end is shadowed by the Martin Luther King assassination. So I'm not sure what we're going to see next. Like what are going to be the threads that hold it together?
Yeah.
We also haven't mentioned the kind of horror comics thing about it. So it's not just horror movies. She's also obsessed with horror comics, and Dees introduces her to all these comics and undergrounds, and I'm assuming Chester the Molester as well, and comes home with a Mad at one stage. Interspersed throughout the book are these random redrawn, quote-unquote, redrawn horror comic covers, but she's invented them all.
Yep. But influenced by the sort of comics that were coming out back then.
Yeah, or even, I'm thinking 68 would have been... So it's well past EC days. It would have been maybe Skywald kind of era or early Warren or something around that period. Yeah. Very kind of lurid covers.
Would that be Eerie or is that gone?
That was Eerie was running in the 70s, so it could have been early around that time. They're interspersed very randomly. Yeah. Like there might be like 20, but they don't seem to they don't like mark chapter breaks because there are none.
Yeah.
They're just kind of suddenly you're hit in the face by a cover.
But also, I mean, bear in mind too that these horror movies that she's riffing on date to me from 50s.
Yes, correct. Because they're on TV at this stage.
Yeah. So it's the art that she has access to.
Yes.
So some of it is out of date for a child of her age at that time.
Yeah. Like
she should be reading and watching sort of almost the influence of the French New Wave in American film. It should be the sort of more post-war Hollywood. Let's do some action films. Let's do some more free-flowing fun films. But she's getting into the whole black and white horror, which is a whole other mood even.
Well, that's interesting too because she witnesses people having sex on the street. She's caught her brother having sex multiple times.
Yeah.
She knows his brother. Dees tries to lie about it. He says, "We're going to go in there and play Monopoly," which I know you don't like. Yeah. So I just stay out here and watch the movie. And she's like, "Yeah, okay, I know what's going on here." So she keeps witnessing, and she has a name for it. It's like the machinery of the city or something. I can't remember what exactly she calls it, and she just accepts it. But at the same time, she's into this very kind of childish entertainment in terms of the movies and the comics. But those movies have a subtext which we have applied to them now where we can see the sexual subtext and all of those kinds of things going on in those movies, or even the kind of Cold War stuff or whatever, those aspects of it, which we see in retrospect. It just seems to me that but for her, I think she's interested in the, as you said, the otherness of it and the monsterness of it. But she doesn't, for someone who's very mature or worldly wise, it's kind of not what a 20-year-old would be reading in that world, if you know what I mean. Like, she has the maturity of a 20-year-old, let's say.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's a maturity that, as you say, has come about as a result of exposure.
Yes, yeah.
And yes, I mean, what you meant by worldly wise, but, like, again, this is, like, she's affected in her interests.
Yes.
So she's going out of her way to have a cultish take on media that is not normal for a child of her age, because that does set her apart, and she's already set apart by circumstance. She might as well represent that in the things she develops an interest in. Which again is the sort of, I'm a freak, I'll be a freak approach,
right,
to media, which some of us might be familiar with.
Yeah.
And again, like that's really interesting, because sometimes, particularly when you look at underground comics and you look at sort of the influences of some of these people, and you maybe have read interviews with some of them, and they talk about, oh, well, I'm really into this, I'm really into that, and you go, how?
Yeah, right.
How did you? That's so random. Like, you weren't just reading Marvel comics like the rest of us. No, they were reading Japanese manga when it was impossible to get Japanese manga, or they were reading old school newsprint serials that they had a particular passion for, which is out of keeping with their social group or their peers. But they fixate on something, and then their style resulted as of this. And that's a very true reflection of the people that Karen, if she continues to be an artist and she grows older, she's going to be meeting individuals like her who maybe they won't be into the same things, but they'll share a sort of passionate interest in the thing they love because of their freak outcast state.
I think you've identified the lineage of the book. More than the underground comics, I think it's the horror movies and the horror comics.
Yeah.
And we haven't spoken, we don't know how autobiographical this is.
Sure.
But it feels very richly textured in terms of locale and the time, that period of history, that it seems to me like she must have had that kind of upbringing. And I just remember seeing those headlines about how I wanted to be a monster.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like Emil Ferris is kind of Karen in some respect. And I feel like maybe that's more of what's informing the final product then.
And it's like, I think, less than 20 years away from Carol Clover, sorry, I keep saying Cleaver, writing Men, Women and Chainsaws.
Okay, yeah.
That's why I call her Cleaver by accident. Yeah. Which was a sort of feminist film theory that argues that, a lot of censors were cutting horror movies because there's this idea that the women are being victimized in these horror movies, and it's all about inspiring men to commit violence. And her argument was, well, no, the man who watches the horror film, and typically men were seen to be the intended audience for horror films, are relating to the victim. So they're actually experiencing a sense of empathy for the victim, not the killer. It's the victim that they want to share a space with.
Yeah, and it's always a final girl, right?
Yeah, and hence the final girl. And that's Jamie Lee Curtis and Sigourney Weaver, who are very tall, reedy women, and you can almost imagine a man looking at it and going, yeah, I can be like that. not as stereotypically feminine as film would have female leads at that time. So, Clover was sort of writing about that, and she's writing about that because film theory and film fandom had reached a sort of critical mass by the 80s, where you had lots of filmmakers who, like Karen, had an obsessive interest in horror. It wasn't just studio-backed development. It was weird individuals embraced these media, embraced these genres, and then kept rehashing tropes and kept rehashing moments. Like we were talking about Halloween early before we started recording, And Halloween is almost like John Carpenter's Halloween is another signpost for a lot of horror fans, horror aficionados. It's set in motion a lot of other filmmakers. And how many of those filmmakers and how many of those films that they produced are a result of watching and rewatching and rewatching and rewatching that same bloody movie, and then any other movie that mimicked that movie. So yeah, this sort of is... This is a comic that feels like it's on the cusp of that era, where that obsessiveness tips over into productivity. And we start reading all this media, comics, films, books, that are clearly influenced by midnight cinema, drive-in cinema, trash cinema, and whatever, underground comic book art as well. Throw that into the mix too. That's why I love it. It's just it feels like a message in a bottle from another time,
It does. I think it's better than Stuck Rubber Baby, which I think was a great book. But I think it's because it's so stylistically accomplished.
Yeah.
In so many ways. I am looking forward to Volume 2. I would like to know how many volumes there are before I get to the last page of it.
Yeah. You just want to know what you're in for, like how much time you have to invest in this.
I have to say also I read it twice over a period of 2 weeks, and I read 100 pages a day.
Yeah.
Like 4 days. That's too fast to be reading. It's probably better to absorb it on like 50 pages or 25 or something, like a normal novel almost.
Yeah.
It's so dense.
Yeah, usually dense.
Theme and stuff. All right. Any final words, or are we good?
I think we're good, man. I mean, like I've rhapsodized enough about this.
All right.
This is the book I give people. If anyone's listening to this has not read My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris, please do.
And I would recommend try to get a physical copy rather than digital, which I often recommend on this show for various excuses. But seriously, it's.
I don't know how you would read this digitally. Honestly.
Well, it's on Comixology.
It is. You're right. Yeah.
And
here you go. Here's one. Again, sorry.
Yeah, the faces. Also, we haven't talked about them. Every person has a remarkable face.
Yeah. I've just opened it to a random page, and I found one of the mock-up comic book covers that she introduces. So this one's called Ghoulish. Yeah. And it's 3 ladies, and 2 of them are murderers. One has a bloodied saw. One has a bloodied scissors. It's interestingly, because it's set in a... looks like a department store.
Yeah, because it's called Department Store Horror. Cannibal Mannequins Chopping Spree. And
then they're going to murder a woman who's in the store with them. Because they're mannequins. Yeah, they're evil mannequins. But I guess 3 women, what looks like 3 women, and traditionally dressed women, but they're covered in gore and grue, and they've got bloodied instruments. Oh, I love that. That's just fantastic. Anyway, so that's just an example of the kind of delights that wait in this. And as you say, you couldn't, if you flick through that page, flick past that, I think digital does lend itself to the flick. You're scrolling from left to right. This is something you dwell on. Yeah. You sit on a page and you just take in the detail.
Yeah. Especially when you get to the artwork, like in the museum.
Yeah.
Because she often gives a full page or half page to a piece of artwork, like a painting that's hanging in the museum. And she describes it, but she also depicts her emotional journey through it and that synesthesia that I talked about and her kind of the associations that she draws to it and stuff. So... yeah, it's there to be lived in as much as... there's a moment where she talks about how when you put 2 circles together, there's an intersection that's like an eye on its side. And she also talks about how the artwork has triangles, and wherever the points are is like kind of the direction of the art or the point of interest or climax. And I really wish someone smarter than me would go through this book and see if she's actually done those 2 things throughout, because I bet she has.
Yeah,
a lot of the way through. I really think she would have been careful about that. And
so this is an auteur comic.
Oh yeah,
yeah, which we don't have many of those.
Like Asteria's Polyp was kind of at that level as well. Yeah.
Like it's theory and execution all in a package.
Yeah.
So.
My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris is published by Fantagraphics. Here at deconstructingcomics.com, we produce Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Pulls. If you like our shows and want to support them, pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. Help us make our next goal and unlock more vintage episodes. More patron-only audio content to come. Also, please help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. We'd really appreciate it if you gave us a star rating there and a short review. Even if it's just a sentence, tell the world why you enjoy Deconstructing Comics. Another way to show your appreciation is simply to write to us. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or contact us through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We're also on the Comics Podcast Network at comicspodcasts.com and on comicon.com, where our new episodes usually go up a few days before they appear in our feed. Our theme is from bensound.com. This past Thursday on To the Bat Pulls, we discussed the 1966 Signet novel Batman vs. Three Villains of Doom by Winston Lyon. Is the book like the TV show, the comics, or something else all its own? Listen to the Bat Pulls in its own podcast feed on Apple Podcasts or other podcast apps, or at tothebatpulls.libsyn.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The next episode will appear next week. Watch for it. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.